pal Tripp here, and today I am back at the Harley-Davidson Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Well, today we've got a treat because I've got two gentlemen with me who can give us a little bit more insight than you would get just walking through the museum and giving yourself a tour. Here with me today I have...
Hey Tripp, I'm Paul James, PR manager for Harley-Davidson.
And here we have...
Bill Jackson, Archives Manager. Welcome, Tripp.
Nice to meet you, Bill. We're going to go through the museum, maybe give them a few facts that they wouldn't get anywhere else.
Sounds good.
All right, folks, hang on. Here we go. I guess this is the holy grail of the museum, possibly.
This is the oldest motorcycle in our collection. It dates to 1903-04, and the engine is an official 03-04 engine. The frame is a 1905 frame, so the question is, were the founders using the most period correct parts that they had available to make this represent their first production models? It gets misunderstood at times as the first Harley that was ever sold to the public, which we do not have evidence of.
Okay, so this isn't the actual serial one.
Well, that's its nickname, because when it was disassembled in the 1990s for restoration, there's internal engine parts that have a 1 stamped on them, so it's kind of a nickname that caught on and it's been handed on to today.
Gotcha. I learned not too long ago that the actual first Harley dealership wasn't in Milwaukee, it was in Chicago. It was C.H. Lang. And they reportedly sold 3 of the first 5 bikes that were ever built in the shed. Do you have any of those original bikes that they sold back here?
We do not. Actually, there's no documentation about this specific vehicle. There's other bikes that have turned up. If people have read the Antique Motorcycle magazine, there's one out there that is purportedly a C.H. Lang sold early bike. But in the first few years, he's selling about 1/3 of their production. So he's really the main conduit.
Good customer. What a gorgeous bike this is.
So what we think is really the most amazing thing about this collection here is it predates any of us. We have evidence of the founders of Harley actually building this collection, starting the collection as early as 1919. They actually went to a motorcycle show in Chicago. They brought their new model year like you do, and then they brought a retrospective. And they'd also put a magazine ad out that year saying that they were looking for good condition early bikes going all the way back to 05. So we know that by 1920, 1919, they're actually setting side bikes, and that their successors just keep that up and they keep building that collection, and we do it now. So we're actually taking on a process that Arthur Davidson and William Harley were doing.
How many bikes do you have in the museum all told now?
At any given time, there's about 140 bikes on display, but there's a lot more in storage. The total collection's at over 500.
Anything special about these 3 that we should know?
First of all, you've got a 1906 Harley. It has been restored, but behind that is the sole surviving Harley-Davidson 1909 V-twin.
Nice.
As far as we know, only 27 were built, and that is the sole surviving one anywhere in the world, and it's unrestored. So this 1909 and the 1911, that's the original factory paint and plating that those bikes left the assembly line with. In many cases, these bikes would run with relatively little work. That's actually how they're retained. That's why we really don't do restorations. We acquire bikes with as much originality as we can get. And so to our mind, would we ever strip and refinish this 1909 twin? The answer is absolutely not.
It's patina, friends.
Exactly.
It's patina.
They're museum pieces. You know, it's not, we don't take them to shows just to win trophies. That's not why they're here. They're here as museum pieces.
So what was relative horsepower or speed of one of these early bikes?
We think of the earliest days with the singles, because of course the first bikes that they're making are just single cylinder, about 4 horsepower, 5 horsepower.
I think I've seen like 4.5, something like that.
They're going up from there.
And what sort of speed are you gonna have on the old single?
The very earliest singles, maybe 35 miles an hour, 40 with the wind at your back, but that's about it. That's pretty good speed in those days.
How much more horsepower or speed are we getting, let's say, by the time we get from 1903, the first bike, to a 1911?
Yeah, well, they're coming up incrementally, 6 and 7, and of course, the thing about the 1909 twin is it's kind of to be considered not really production, because they think they're gonna almost double up on their horsepower, and it didn't really work that well. So they went back to the drawing board in 1911. They're coming out with a V-twin. From 1911 on, there's always a V-twin in our product line.
The reason I ask is because if you do let me take one of these up the street to go to lunch, I want to know which one I'm going to choose. So.
So the British Museum has the Rosetta Stone. We have the 1936 EL. Now this is an example of one of those bikes that was saved by the company right from the assembly line. This bike was never in private ownership. You notice it's unrestored. if you were hard pressed to find the few unrestored knuckleheads anywhere in the world, this is one of them. This is a foundational bike for Harley-Davidson. This was the game changer. The American competitors never really came out with its equivalent. The engine architecture really remains with us today in the Milwaukee 8 engine. Anybody just dipping their toes into the waters of Harley history, they're going to know, had Harley not built this bike, it might have been played out very differently for Harley-Davidson. The engine was all new, the frame was all new, the transmission was all new. It's a period of this beautiful Art Deco paint that they did.
Yeah, and it's gorgeous. Yeah. And this was the first major model to use the knucklehead engine?
Yeah. After the knucklehead, a lot of the architecture remains, but then the things like the heads change. So you've got the pan head and the shovel head, and other things change, of course, too. Then you get into the modern era, and you've got things like electronic fuel injection and better oil circulation. So that architecture remains, but it's with all of the things that you need with, you know, modern technology.
Gotcha. Now here's a question for you. I look down here and I go, my God, I would think this is a bike pedal. Is this like a standard kickstart?
That's the getting into the era of the kickstart as we know it, which was predated by what they called a step start. But
wow,
that's your starter mechanism. So the other thing about this bike is that it was a big gamble for the company, and this is really the throes of the Great Depression. And all kinds of funding is getting cut, and we've got the board of directors meeting minutes back in the archives, and Bill Harley is heading up product development. He's coming to meetings with new ideas, and they're shooting them down and taking away funding. This is one of the few things from the 1930s that made its way to the market. And it ends up not only saving the company, but defining its future.
And you can tell, I mean, there's still a lot in the styling of this bike that you'll see for the next 20, 30, 40 years. I mean, in a heritage, you see a little bit of the elements.
Well,
here.
that was the intention when the Softails came out in 1984, and then they got their biggest redesign probably in 2018. Retaining that look of the straight line from the frame, from the head of the frame down to the rear hub, and with that Softail redesign, they even wanted to retain that look of that horseshoe oil tank, which are now side covers because the oil tank got relocated. Harley riders want that look retained. They love the advancements in the technology, but please let's keep it a Harley. Let's make it look
old
like
school.
Yeah, and just the colors of that period, the 33 with that red and black. I mean, and that was just one of the options from that year. Anywhere you go and you see a 33 in different colors, you're always going to stop and just take it in.
I'm thinking white walls. Where's the white walls?
Not a thing in those days for Harley. So, on to racing. Yeah, this gallery is called Clubs and Competition. There's a longer story about why we put those two things in the same gallery, but this is a replica section of the old wooden motor dromes, as they were called. A lot of people call them board tracks. Arthur Davidson called them murder dromes because they were so dangerous. You've got very steep bankings in the turns. Some of them are quite short, some of them are quite long. There was evidence of 2 board tracks that were over 2 miles in a circuit, which is amazing. The danger factor cannot be understated. And these bikes do not have brakes, and they're going to get oily eventually. It was a real thrill sport. We think one of the things that killed the sport off, frankly, was the expense. It can be a high overhead business today to have a racetrack.
The sport didn't literally kill itself off, in other words.
Yeah. Really, it became, the economy and things led to much more practical from a financial standpoint. And the expense, you know, when they started to realize things like, let's have a closed flat track circuit, takes up less space, certainly less materials. Road courses that were fashioned out of countryside, you know, farm country roads. That was a lot more practical, and the thrill was still there. Of course,
it must have been an amazing sound to have 8 or 10 bikes going around those boards.
I can show you the footage where all of the racers would cluster up into this narrow little group because they're dividing the air resistance between them. And you know, people make a joke, you could put a blanket over the entire field, and if you fall out of that group, you know, you're going to have more drag on you and you're going to fall behind.
Exactly.
It's like you see in motorsports now.
Drafting, yeah.
Yeah.
So what would a normal track, you said some of them got to be as big as 2 miles, what would a typical one of these tracks be in distance?
They could be a quarter mile, a mile. In the film footage, you're going to see that this particular track in the film footage was massive. The amount of timber that went into these things just staggers the imagination.
Now, anything in particular about any of these bikes here that stands out above the others, or?
Well, just that these are factory-built racers. And that makes them super rare because you're getting, in the earliest years, you even had privateer type racers. They're taking a stock motorcycle and they're adapting it. The factory built racers are super rare. Just off to my left here, you've got an 8-valve racer that it's believed that less than 20 of those were even built. Because that's the thing about racing vehicles, they're not built in big numbers. Just the rarity, the lightweight, you know, you can't, if you can have a great experience, you could have people handle one of these bikes. They're incredibly light. Again, no brakes, there's no starter mechanisms. They were pull started, push started.
Which one was this?
This is our 8-valve.
The original Milwaukee 8, huh?
Exactly. This is getting into the period of automotive makers understanding the ability to increase power by way of more valves. And so you've got 4 valves per cylinder. It's the first racing motorcycle that's averaging over 100 miles an hour. As far as we know, there's only 3 official 8 valves left in the world. There are replicas, but this is one of them. This was raced by a British racer named Freddie Dixon, among other things.
And behind it is, I guess, your typical track. This looks like maybe, what, a quarter mile track, maybe? Probably
even more than that. Sometimes the photos and the film don't give a great sense, but one could only theorize. You know, I'm sure timber was less expensive in those days by comparison.
Right.
And just America had a lot more lumber sitting around than, you know, we would now.
Now, has this big bike been touched up or repainted? I mean, it just looks so beautiful. It is restored, okay.
It was acquired from private ownership many years ago.
Now, the odd-looking gizmo in the front there with the little star on it, it looks like some part of the suspension. Is that...
yeah, it is. That's part of the suspension.
Doesn't look like it's really forgiving there.
No.
And it's got three caps on a gas tank. What would those...
Gas and oil.
Gas, and then one oil, maybe?
Yep. And you notice that this is the era both racing bikes and civilian bikes, street bikes, don't have any rear suspension. So the handling is going to be very, very different than anybody would understand suspension to be now. So this footage is land speed record attempts at Daytona Beach. Some of them were successful for Harley-Davidson. Now it's looping into the section we have about the wooden board tracks.
1928.
And some of these photos and films just show how much timber went into building some of these things. Of course, they're racing bicycles and cars on these as well.
Wow.
There's internal wood tracks now, indoor wood tracks for bicycle velodromes. In another couple of seconds, you're going to get a good shot of what the action actually looked like.
Oh yeah, that looks like about a 40-degree angle there too. Those guys scaling that wall.
You're going to see these bikes getting pull started. They're actually going to be towed for a short distance while they get started up in that fashion. Pretty old school kind of stuff.
What we're standing in front of now is the tank wall, and these gentlemen have told me that this is probably the most photographed area of the museum, and it's easy to see why. There's these tanks are just gorgeous, and the different liveries or the different color schemes throughout the years.
Yeah, these are actually reproductions. I mean, these are modern day gas tanks, but they really start with 1933, even though you could talk about a teardrop gas tank going back to 25. But you're absolutely right. In the modern era now, the paint and graphics might be unique to a specific model, whereas in the early years, they're probably the same across the entire product line. This can be a really emotional place for people because they'll say, that was my first bike, that was my dad's first bike, and it really kind of takes them back.
So the tanks are all the same, but the colors and the designs represent back from like when to when, would you say?
From 1933 up until just a few years ago.
I've got one of those.
There you go. The thing is, if that tour lands when we're up there, we can just pause and
Sure.
let
They won't be there for very long.
Right.
This is it.
This is the infamous cage.
Absolutely.
Maybe just more famous than infamous?
Infamous. Now, I didn't see you guys put like a high security card or
I just
put
did.
a punch.
Yeah, you missed it.
I missed it. Dang it.
Yeah.
This
I
is
told
on
you I was going to blur that part out, but I was going to see it
a
first.
retina scanner. He had to,
And the reason they call it the cage, folks, is everybody gets to come up to this part and rattle the cage or rattle the door, and all they get to do is look in, but they can't come in. Obviously, this is a very special room. I mean, you can just one glance and there's some amazing stuff in here. So what type of people would normally have access to this room? And
just the archives and curatorial staff, and then a few from security, a few from our visitor experience team. It is a very special space. You know, you can still get chills after all the years of coming into this room and appreciating the practice of saving all of these bikes, because had they not done that, would this museum have even been possible? First of all, it would have been prohibitively expensive, because this is like getting into the late 2000s, 2004, 5, 6, 7. The collection is just here. In fact, it was a CEO way all the way back in the 1970s who would look at this collection and say, we've got to do something with this.
Wow. How many bikes are in here all total, do you think?
At any given time, it can be 330 to 40. It just all depends on the week or the day. Things kind of move into exhibit and out. Things have come out of exhibit. Our newest exhibit actually are bikes all on loan. Actually, almost entirely all bikes that are completely on loan to us from private individuals. So, and other museums. You know, it's not just about our collection. There's some great stuff that people want to show here.
So how does this work? You come up, and are these on rollers, or
Exactly.
is it a forklift that comes and gets them?
And the building was built to be an archives and museum, which means you can set the rails right into the floor. And yeah, it's the only thing special about it to us is it's black and orange. But this is an industrial grade mobile compacting system. And then the bikes are on pallets, and they're forklifted on and off, and then depalletized. And it's very easy. And you may have noticed there's not a chronological order, there's not an order of sizes, but it's the computer age. Let's let the computer do the work. They are set by height, so the really short guys are up on the tall.
All the sporties up there, huh?
Top sections. Bikes with windshields get more space. And you know, there's a system, there's end caps with a letter system that tells us what letter each carriage is. And then there's bays and shelves and all that kind of thing. So it's very easy and quick to get in here when we need to.
So these bikes are here for study, or for what's the purpose of having all these bikes here? What is your use for them? What are you going to be?
Well, it's great that you mentioned the word study, because our product development people do come here to do research. When they were working on what became the 2018 Softail models, they came here to study the bikes in depth, Sportsters and touring models, exhaust systems. There was a team that came years ago just to look at really old exhaust systems.
To see what would give us that old Harley sound, or is it from more of a design standpoint that they look at? Or
all of the above.
Wow.
With the originality of the collection, they can come and say, well, what did the actual Pepper Red, as it was called, for 1956, what did it actually look like? Now, with this collection, hardly ever having had sunlight on these bikes, the paint is going to be in fantastic shape.
It is, yeah, definitely.
And there's people out there who could reproduce that red in really just a fantastic way, but you know, just having the original can't be beat. So
now, are all the bikes in here stock, or
no?
Will you have some highly modded bikes, or
highly modded? They're way up high. Well, one's not way up high. There's a dragster from the 1990s.
Oh, I see. Yeah,
built by an employee. There's another dragster way up there.
Do I see the XR1000 there? Is that it?
VR1000?
Oh, it is what? VR1000.
Road racing.
So
this was really, up until now, the baggers. This was your last hurrah in racing, wasn't it?
No. We raced Sportsters. We raced the XR750 in flat track racing. We raced the XR1200 in the AMA Pro Series, all the way up till 2014.
And fans of Moto America would recall, and if they know their history, would recall back in the days of the AMA Superbike Series. So that's where these were raced. But again, racers can be among the lowest numbers. So we try to make sure to retain things like XR750s. And you name it, you know, King of the Baggers, we're already talking about which one or two of those bikes will come into the collection.
We have a King of the Baggers fan over there.
Yes. I just read they were thinking about getting into Europe for some of them.
Race in Europe.
You know, it always seems that when you're into motorsports or motor vehicles, that racing is what carries a brand. And I wanted Harley to get back into racing in a major way in some form or fashion. And personally, I think that'll be a great carrier for the brand. And it's kind of like a university having a football team. It's the same thing. If someone who makes motor vehicles has a
They're definitely feeling it in Moto America. Increase their attendance. It's the King of the Baggers is the most social media viewed racing that they do of all the classes. So yeah, it's super exciting.
Well, with vintage racers, one story I've often told is way up high here is a 1960 KR racer, and this has happened from time to time. Our visitor experience staff calls me at my desk or others and says, I've got a woman on the phone, she says she's the daughter of Brad Andrus, and they start yelling, put her on, put her on. And this bike was sitting in a museum in San Diego.
And he was obviously the guy that rode that thing to victory a few times.
That is the 1960 Daytona 200 winner. So
wow.
When a bike like that has that specific history,
and you can get additional provenance on the phone.
Absolutely, and you see that on auctions on TV. You know, people who watch those auctions. This isn't just any race car or race bike. This one specifically won. That just brings so much more value, and you know, those are the stories we love to tell.
What do we have? The chromed out sort of racing bike with the incredibly big rake up top.
That is a famous dragster from the 1960s and 70s called the Super Sportster. And the gentleman who built it was working for a dealership in Columbus, Ohio at the time. And he wanted to respond to another drag race team that had a Triumph, a drag racing Triumph, that guy called the Hog Slayer because he didn't like Harley. He said, no Harley's ever going to beat me. And Tom Reiser, the builder of the Super Sportster, said, challenge accepted.
Think twice, buddy.
Yep.
How long did it take him to beat him?
I forget the actual, it was real early in 1969, and I think one of the races they broke the ETA record. So, and just the day that Tom himself brought it here for delivery, he's just telling these amazing stories. After that, I got us a video camera because I'm like, when people come here, you know, don't let them leave without, you know, telling these great stories, because I'm thinking somebody should be recording this. But we wrote it all down. I went back to my desk and wrote notes. Like
so on air, okay, so out of the bikes here, let's say there's 300 bikes in here. What percentage of them are on loan, and what percentage would you guys own?
The vast majority in this room at any given time are company owned.
Company owned, okay. How long will a bike stay in here and you go, oh, well, we've got 50 more bikes that we'd rather study a little bit more closely and we don't have the room? Do they go to a secondary museum, kind of like the Smithsonian does, and you bring those in, or is it a rotating? Do you ever put any of these out on the floor?
Yes. Now, on like a 1 or 2 or 3 basis, they're going to go into temporary exhibit or longer term exhibit. We just built in some room for growth. And actually sitting in that rack over there is our 2023 acquisition. And yep. And
so no Highway King or Fast Johnny?
Well, he's the latest 2023.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got you.
Well, and there's another 2023 that's due to come here, which is anniversary, because whenever an anniversary edition bike comes out, the practice has been to get at least one.
I really like the color scheme of this year's anniversary,
stunning.
Particularly on the Heritage. I just think beats the band.
And the new CVOs, I had a chance to ride one, and it's great.
Do you have a favorite bike in here?
In here, I mean, it depends on the day. And we were talking. No, seriously, we were talking about the Super Sportster, and sometimes it's the story or the experience that came with it.
Today's Thursday. I'll just remind you of that. Okay, you can pick one.
In the museum, we were talking about the Knucklehead. That bike can still give me chills after all of these years. Sometimes it's not a bike. I remember the time that the son of Arthur Davidson called. He was 94 at the time, and he had a fantastic sense of humor. And he said, "I've got some junk." That was his word. And I said, yeah, we know who you are. And I sat in his dining room with him and his wife, and he said, I want the Harley Museum to have this, and I want you to have that. And it was like the passports that Arthur used to go overseas to recruit dealers. I'm like, are you kidding me? We were able to get him here about 2 years later. Just a fantastic. We caught him on video.
This is an AMF era product, right? Aramici, was that it? Or?
Well, Aramaki.
Aramaki, okay.
And so this is the era where dirt bikes, as we understand them now, off-road bikes are coming to be more
this is like
era.
Late 60s to 75, 76, kind of that era. That's actually when I got in.
Those go all the way back to the 1960s, where Harley bought, it's essentially an Italian motorcycle company that was already producing bikes, partly to get into the European market, but then also let's sell them here in the U.S. Why not?
Exactly.
Because it was the next big thing coming.
Bike looks brand new. The only thing that gives it away is the drum brake in the front. Oh my goodness, what do we have up top there?
That's our barn find. The thought was to acquire a bike that just...
C.H. Lang's barn?
No, I wish. or maybe it is. We'll do research on it and pull them in. But an example of a bike that just literally sat probably in a barn or a chicken coop or something all those years and just rusted to heck. But yeah, so it's not always about this pristine, perfect factory. We were talking about racing bikes a minute ago. We want them as raced, for example. In fact, in some cases, we actually had to ask our racing department, please don't clean it up and make the bodywork look perfect. Or King of the Baggers. We would want a King of the Baggers bike to come here as raced, ideally. Please don't make it perfect.
So you get a phone call. You're sitting at your desk, you get a phone call, and someone says, hey, Bill, I got this. Mm-hmm. What is the type of thing or the one thing that people can call you up and say, I got this, it's yours, that makes you the most excited of all?
Somebody calls and says, I've got this set of notebooks with a bunch of equations in them and it says William S. Harley in them. That's hypothetical, but that's like, where do you live and can I come over right now? It just really all depends. You know, the earliest police bike in our collection is 1936, which is not to complain, but if somebody had a police Harley that was older and in great condition and said, hey, let's talk about this, absolutely. You know, what we don't do is say, we don't even want to hear about it or don't get back to people. If it's the one time you don't ask the questions, it's going to be the one that got away. First of all, we always ask questions. If they have photos, that's great. People will be surprised at how many things we're offered we already have. If they say, I've got a 1961 Sprint, we say, you know, we've already got one. We put you in touch with some other museums. We actually have a written list of criteria, things like originality, rarity.
What do we have up front here?
But this is the area where the bikes actually get worked on, and I'm careful not to say restored because I've just said, you know, before, we don't do restorations, but we don't need to. This bike used to be a bike that we ran on campus. This was part of what is called our sit-on gallery. We used to have bikes. We used to have antique bikes that people could sit on. Now it's all modern bikes, which actually was customer request. We were getting so many comments from people saying, I would love to sit on bikes at the end of the museum experience, but I want to sit on new ones because that's what I'm excited about. And again, we built in some room for storage. This is our latest.
There's the new CVO.
Absolutely.
I got to tell you, I've never been a fan of either fairing of the Street Glide or the Road Glide, but now with the CVO, I love both fairings. I mean, my favorite fairing up until just a little bit ago was the Lowrider ST, and now I see these, and I've gone from, I really don't like the looks of. I'd own one, I'd ride one, but you know, and now I look at this, I just go, wow, I'd be all over that.
Again, we're doing exactly what the founders did. We'll never need to restore that bike. And taking good care of it is just something that's going to be part of our workflow. Just outside the cage there, you've got Elvis's bike.
Now, was that actually Elvis's, one of his bikes?
Yep, one of his very first motorcycles he ever owned.
I'm into sidecars. It's been my dream to own a bike with a sidecar forever. Maybe someday.
Yeah, so this is a 1920 J model. J was one of the mainstays of that period. It's twin, it's got a sidecar. We used to run this bike around campus once in a while for visitors just so you get that sense of what they looked like, sounded like, smelled like, because the old hot smell of hot oil, which is a great smell.
Now, the box with the switch, is that an add-on? Is that something that came with this bike originally?
That's a toolbox.
And then this is a beautiful
bike.
A
1928 J model, and it's restored. And this is actually a Goulding sidecar, which was one of the really popular sidecars of the era.
Yeah, that's a fiberglass sidecar, isn't it?
Yep. This just went recently to an event here in Milwaukee to kind of promote the museum. As mentioned, we used to let people sit on this bike, but those bikes got taken out so that people could experience the new stuff more.
And then over here is your work area. Is this where they bring bikes in if they need some major or
this is where a member of
preservation work, I guess?
Really, yeah, the phrases we use is preservation and conservation.
So you might knock off a couple of broken parts, try to replace those if there's
exactly
undue rust, maybe a little bit of
fluids are purged, batteries removed. If there's minor replacement of parts needed, like you said, that's what will happen. Ideally, like it's a new old stock part.
And this is a Cervicar.
This is a 1955.
You have a semblance of a tool shop. Do you make any of your own stuff here? I see you've got a press and
Not really.
A drill, but...
It's like with the work that goes in these bikes, the lighter the better.
And you're not doing any fabricating in here, obviously?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, this is an amazing room, guys. I've loved every second of being in here. Really appreciate the opportunity. I'm sure the people who see this video are going to feel the same way.
It's a cool place. It gives me the shivers every time.
Yeah, this is neat.
Stories, people. A lot of the bikes were never owned by anybody, but some were. Think about this pre-war era Harley is in the middle of the rack.
Which one is that?
So this guy that's in, see where the V-rod is? It's in the middle. Middle row furthest back. What model is that, Bill?
What are we talking about?
The bomber tail gunner. So Bill can tell the story better than I can, but this bike right
The
here.
red 41 here.
That's a
flathead.
Owned by
right here.
His senior year in high school, right? He put how many miles did he put on his senior year?
Oh my gosh, it was over 20,000. So he got it as part of his high school graduation present, and he was living in Alabama. He went off to fight in World War II and was a tail gunner on a B-17, and exchanged letters with his girlfriend, who they agreed they were going to get married when he got home, and he didn't make it home like a lot of those guys. And so he and his crewmates lost their lives over Yugoslavia when they were shot down. So but we've got photos of him riding the bike and the correspondence that I was describing. So that's a great, it's like a collection that comes with the bike, which is something we really love.
They had a shrine basically for him where they had his leather jacket and all of his war materials and the letters he'd sent home and his motorcycle, and they kept it all those years.
Now, are those colored marbles that are adhered on the rear fender, or are those lights?
Those are studs.
That was obviously something he put on the bike, right?
Yep. Motorcycle dealers, Harley would sell them and other aftermarket companies, and when people started to get into the pure decorative side.
Yeah. Because there's a story of a guy, it's an amazing story and sad story that represents many veterans' experience that didn't make it home.
Right.
And there's his motorcycle. He loved it and he customized it. It's his.
A part of him is here in this cage.
Yep, still alive.
All right, we're going to get to see the vault opened. Oh, I love that sound. Got to get those prison doors clanging shut. So, Bill, what bike do we have here again?
This is a 1956 model KH Harley-Davidson, but it's not just any KH. It is the one that was purchased by Elvis Presley.
The Elvis Presley?
The Elvis Presley.
Not Elvis Costello, but Elvis Presley.
Good distinction there. But this is believed to be only the third Harley he ever owned. He posed on this motorcycle.
Was that the famous one where he had his riding cap on and the black leather jacket, and he's kind of...
That cover.
Oh, there we go. That's it. And this is the bike.
So your viewers might know about the Enthusiast magazine. Elvis was on the cover of the Enthusiast sitting on this very bike.
That was Elvis's bike when he was 21.
56 is the year, as Elvis fans know, where he really took off. I mean,
Right.
he was famous at the beginning of the year, but by the end of the year, he was in the stratosphere as far as popularity. And he gave the bike to his friend, who took over the payments, and the friend kept the bike all those years, restored it, and then sold it to the company. So we're not out to get every celebrity Harley, but when you're talking Elvis Presley and Harley, you just...
Now, I've also heard that Elvis bought and gave away dozens of Harleys throughout his life.
Supposedly, yes, and the same set of cars.
Cadillacs, particularly, I've heard. And what do we have down here? Hiding in the corner.
Library of engines.
And are these original? These are all original stuff here?
Yep. There's gas tanks, engines. We usually try to keep up on the Key V twins. Something that's back in the museum is a whole room devoted to engine technology for Harley-Davidson.
All the racing fairings.
Yeah, those are VR1000 engines in the floor there with the carbon fiber heads.
Oh, wow.
Or valve covers, I should say.
I envy you guys.
So we're at the lower level of the museum right now, and it gets into the post-World War II years. There's so many stories you can tell about this period, but among the things that's changing is Harley's main competition before World War II was from within the U.S. borders, even though Harley had made good headroads into foreign countries. But the other thing that's happening now is all of a sudden this influx of European bikes are coming in, the 1950s, you've got Nortons and Triumphs and BSAs, and it goes on and on and on.
And Dick Man won on a Honda, and it was Katie bar the door.
Well, exactly, and they're doing well in flat track, and so Harley had to adjust, and you start to see like singles that came. It's a long story about how these came into the product line, but based on a German DKW design. But the K models, which we were talking about that with Elvis, was really response to the British stuff. They were twins, but they were small, nimble. Those get replaced by Sportsters in '57, which is the longest living name in Harley's history. So it's all about adjusting, and then around the corner here represents when another part of Europe, namely Italy, starts to become a player. Motor scooters are coming along big in the US. Ermaki was a company that Harley bought just to get a foot space in Southern Europe. Smaller bikes, singles, very reliable. You can still see them out there on eBay Motors and some of these other auction websites. And
every now and then you'll see a topper. Was the topper part of Ermaki or no?
No, that was actually an American. We always make a distinction between the Milwaukee-made stuff and the Italian-made. But the funny story about the topper was motor scooters very quickly just explode in the U.S. Cushman was one of the major manufacturers. And Harley-Davidson dealers started selling Cushmans because they were doing so well. And the company said, "What are you guys doing? You're selling motor scooters." And the dealer's response was, "Build us a scooter and we'll sell one." So for about 6 years, Harley makes a motor scooter called a Topper. Funny thing is, there was one with a sidecar.
Right.
And they were good little scooters, but the thing is, the motor scooter market cooled way down for everybody, just almost immediately.
Well, what was the one movie with the Vespa in it? The girl, the famous movie in the '50s that really popped the scooter market.
It's on the tip of my brain. With television history, there was a TV show called 77 Sunset Strip.
Right. With
a guy named Ed Kooky Burns, and he wrote a topper. And it was one of these, he was like super hip, like, "Hey, Daddy-O" kind of stuff. And
Kooky, lend me your comb. Yeah.
Exactly. There was a song, and so that ad right there says, "Kooky, lend me your topper." So, right to your right there.
Oh, there it is. Sure.
Then the Ermaki. This was the first of the Harley Ermaki line.
Here's a question. For about a few months during the war, they went with a opposed twin for better cooling over in the desert. Then it turned out they didn't need them. I think they made 300 of them or something, whatever it was, 1,100, and then stopped. But just the inherent nature of the cooling advantages, is there any reason that Harley didn't ever go further down that road on the opposed twin air cooled?
Well, with that specific bike, what would have happened was the government just ended the contract, which happened like crazy during World War II. I mean, there was stuff that was developed just strictly for the D-Day landing. And so, as the war moves out of North Africa and you're not in that hot, sandy conditions that they were in North Africa, the government goes, "Okay, we don't need these anymore." It would have been like that with a lot of things. And, the V-twin was really where Harley's tooling was. And so anytime you're going to make a radical change to your engine architecture, your development and tooling costs are going to go through the roof.
I just thought maybe since they already had that opposed twin, they were already cranking out 1,100 of them, that they might have put out something else. But I'm sure there's a
well, and the other thing is it largely borrowed or maybe infringed on a BMW, and you can do that when you're in war.
Yeah,
you're infringing on somebody you're at war with, but after the war, BMW is still alive. So
exactly.
Like, you know what? Maybe we'll go back to doing V-twin.
Makes very good sense. There's the Shortster.
Shortster. You actually got the name. Short era of mini bikes, no pun intended.
Now, I had a friend in the early 70s, he had one of these, and when he went to kickstart it, he had to straddle it from the front and kickstart it the other way.
I believe it.
The kickstart didn't go back, the kickstart went frontwards.
I believe it.
And I didn't know if that was an adapting of an Italian motor. His was on the left-hand side, and he had to straddle the bike and kickstart it backwards.
You just described like there are eras in which based on certain British bikes, you would see Harleys with a right side foot shift and a left side brake, and snowmobiles. People tend to not know about those. Very short-lived.
You can still find these on eBay every now and then?
We hear from people who in Wisconsin and other states, Minnesota, is like, "I still run my Harley snowmobile." Prototypes and another bike that Harley never went to market with.
This looks like a Goldwing competitor.
That's pretty close to what you
predated Honda's liquid-cooled V4 by at least a year.
Yeah. And elements of this bike actually did end up with production Harleys, like the front fairing ends up on the FXRT and FXRP police bikes. The same thing with the saddlebags. But the whole chassis would have been completely different. And they just ended up not going to market. It got killed pretty late in the project for financial reasons. There's our bowling pin.
There's our bowling pin. AMF,
yeah,
obviously.
AMF owned Harley-Davidson. We were a subsidiary of AMF from 1969 to 1981. And it gets misremembered as just nothing but a bad period for Harley, which is not entirely true.
Well, I tell you, if it wasn't for AMF, you guys may not be standing here today.
Exactly.
You know, a lot of people knock AMF, and when it comes to marketing, you don't know something's not going to work until you try it often.
Right.
And you guys tried a lot of things, and you know, I'm not the expert here, and I know Harley or AMF Harley stubbed its toe on a few things possibly, but they tried a lot of new things, and guess what? The company is still alive.
Well, and the development capital that AMF brought made the great products of the 1980s possible.
Right.
And the York, Pennsylvania factory.
Right. You might not have the evolution if it wasn't for AMF.
Exactly.
Well, at the same time they were developing these powertrains, they were working on another motor to kind of bridge the V-twins, and they called it the evolutionary motor. And when this project got killed, they said, we are going forward with the Evolution. I still get dealers walking through this museum saying the Evolution engine saved Harley-Davidson.
Yeah, the public holds the fact that the Evo was the response to the Honda CB line, or the Honda, the Japanese invasion just coming in and wiping everybody off the map, swept into the U.S. And if Harley hadn't reacted,
right,
we'd all be riding something else right now.
That was their intention. They were in a trade war with Yamaha. They were dumping product here unfairly. So it was a situation where they were trying to drive everyone else out of business.
And Harley actually asked for that tariff to be ended from the government, the International Trade Commission, early, which up to that time nobody had done. Right. I mean, why would you not let the tariff just play out? But Harley said, we got healthy so fast and so much. And that was when Ronald Reagan actually came and spoke at the Pennsylvania factory and said, way to go, Harleys. Sitting here to my left is one of the most unusual Harleys you're going to find anywhere in the world. It made a transoceanic journey in 2011. And that was the year that the horrendous tsunami struck Japan. And tsunamis, of course, do a lot of damage coming inland. And then when that water goes out, anything that's buoyant can commonly float with it out to sea. So this bike in a storage container ends up being taken by ocean currents to Canada over the course of over the next year or so.
It was an incredible find. On a remote stretch of beach on British Columbia's Haida Gwaii, Peter Mark discovered a rusted Harley-Davidson in the back of a container.
And it's got just enough buoyancy it doesn't sink to the bottom. So among other things, you can see what a year's worth of ocean salt water is going to do.
Now, is that original chrome right there?
Yeah, so chrome holds up pretty well.
Yeah, Harley chrome does.
Yeah.
Harley chrome. Yeah.
But a guy finds it who lives on that island in British Columbia, contacts a Harley-Davidson dealer who looks up the VIN number, which leads to the owner.
The license plate had Japanese writing on it. The wall of the trailer had Japanese print on one of the tags. And first thought that popped into my head is this is likely from the tsunami in Japan.
The license plate was from here, Miyagi Prefecture, crushed by last year's tsunami.
And Harley Canada says, this is amazing, we found your bike and we'd like to offer you a new one. And the guy was actually putting his life back together, but he said, I'd like the Harley Museum to have it. So it came here. As far as we know, he's never been here.
This is the bike's owner, 29-year-old Ikuo Yokoyama. The tsunami destroyed his home, killed 3 members of his family. He never imagined his motorcycle would be found, for which, he says, he's grateful.
In Japanese culture, too, I think he didn't want the attention.
Yeah.
He had lost everything. He lost his home, he'd lost relatives, and I think he felt, I don't want to be recognized above anyone else. I don't want to be, take something else. And this was a national news story. It was actually probably a global news story, the story of this Harley that floated across the ocean. So it's a really interesting situation for him. But I think it's a symbol of great tragedy. It would be like having a piece of the World Trade Center here.
Somebody in the media said the Harley Museum's going to get this bike running again. No, they're not. No, we're not.
We're going to take it up to the cage and restore it. And Bill's going to be working weekends for the next 17 years.
Nobody's going to get that bike running again. Yeah.
Now here we have a bike that has about 8 trillion signatures on it. Bill, what's the story behind this guy?
In the run-up to Harley's 100th anniversary in 2003, one of our executives got the idea of having every employee of the company sign some part of this bike. And of course, to be a bit practical, some things were taken off and shipped, like the saddlebags. Do you need to bring a whole sidecar rig to all the Harley facilities around the world? You don't. So that's all of the employees that existed during our 100th anniversary. Kind of show how far Harley has come.
And you say there's what? How many signatures on this guy? It says more than 6,000.
Yep.
Wow.
Where's your signature, Bill? This is the archives staff. I'm to the left-hand side, second from the top.
Right, Bill Jackson.
I gotta say that I was surprised when the museum opened how popular this became. Yeah.
So what do we have here? We have like 50,000 pictures on the wall here, backlit. Anything? Are these just random photos by folks that own Harleys around the world, or?
This is actually one of my favorite places, because a tradition that started literally over 100 years ago is people sending in photos of themselves with their bikes, because it's a point of pride. And you can find photos like these with the founders of Harley. You've got a few famous people in here, but a lot of these are just your everyday rider. They're proud of their bikes. I love the wedding photos. You know, people are on their way to their wedding or on their way to the wedding reception. Some of these are people, this guy, one of his bikes is in our collection. People posing with their kids, posing as Mickey and Minnie Mouse. I have no idea why. I've got friends who do this to this day. This is one of our newer exhibits called Off-Road, and we had all agreed when we knew the Pan America model was coming out to talk about where has Harley been in the off-road spaces over the years. And it really goes back to some of the earliest years, because people are running bikes in those early years and cars not on paved roads. But you've got things like the Scat from the 1960s, which unquestionably these are the bikes that are getting into the, people would use words like motocross more in the modern day. But
now, was this pure Harley, or was this Aramaki at all? Or?
This is what we would call one of those American lightweights. This is one of the lightweights pre-1961 that Harley would have made in Milwaukee. But some other bikes that were touted for their off-road capability were the Sport model.
Oh, this is an old one. 21.
One of the really kind of rare birds in Harley's history, because that's an opposed twin, an inline opposed twin, and you can also see that the engine is actually serving as a stressed member. And it's really similar to a British Douglas model. If anybody's a real kind of history geek out there, they might recognize that design.
Did they ever utilize this engine anywhere else besides this?
No, just the Sport.
And what do we have for the, is that for cooling aspect? What is that, a fuel line that goes up and cools around?
But you notice the intake and exhaust share the same manifold. And they knew very early on the value of heating up your intake mixture. And then on the other side is an external flywheel, which is another thing very rare to Harley.
I remember seeing this bike last time I was here. I never even noticed that.
If you've seen the Apple TV series Long Way Up, there was a series called Long Way Round, Long Way Down, and then Long Way Up was Charlie Borman and Ewan McGregor rode motorcycles. And in this case, it was from the southern tip of South America up to California. And they used Harley live wires, which were loaned by the company. And they're obviously modified for some off-road use, because some of the South American road included, guess what, off-road.
Did you see there was a gentleman here for the 120th that had on display between the gift shop and the museum, had his live wire that he had turned into an adventure bike. It was really, really cool. And the guy had put thousands of miles on it, and I said, well, aren't you worried about range? He goes, hey buddy, on an adventure bike, by the time this thing runs out to charge, you're ready to stop.
Yeah, that's the same experience that you and Charlie had, where they were off-road and riding as far as they could go in a day, and then finding charging along the way. And these components, these were prototype components for the Harley-Davidson Pan America 1250 Special. So because the program was such top secret, we had to ask for those components from engineering from that crew without telling them what we were going to do with it. So they were very curious, like, why do you need these wheels and these suspension parts? And we couldn't say. But that's why they were needed, was so that they could be built into these live wires that could go off-road.
I do love to tell the story of this bike. There was a one-time Trans-Amazon rally held in South America in 1988. The guy entered this 1985 Harley-Davidson police model, put a BMW tank on it.
That's the old toaster tank there, huh?
It was 9,000 plus miles of route. He was voted the least likely to finish, and he actually did finish. This rally was so informal, it was so grassroots. Among other things, there was no medical support. So if you wiped out or you got sick, guess what? It's on you to figure it out how you're going to deal with it. And it was never held again. But there's some great stories. There was a documentary that came out a couple years later. An amazing guy. He was into flying airplanes and riding motorcycles and driving cars. Just one of those like natural born adventurers. So this gets into the latter period of some of the off-road bikes. One of the really kind of first dedicated off-road bikes was only the second Sportster model ever to be done, which was the XLCH. So you can see no lighting, no directionals. It's just, that was the only year they did that, but it's one of my favorites. Got the peanut tank, got that bobbed rear fender, knobby tires. People ask, you know, when they were coming out with the Pan America, was it within Harley's total product line, was it the first adventure touring? And people forgot about the Buell Ulysses. Back when the Buells were part of Harley's family, it was a subsidiary. And of course you've got the Pan America right here, which is
there she is. You know, there's a lot of new bikes come out, and you're always going to find a couple people, no matter how good the bike is, that'll say, I don't like it. I've talked to at least 100 people that have ridden these bikes. I have never heard one complaint.
Same.
They're a great motorcycle. I own one. I had 2 Ulysses motorcycles, and we actually have engineers working with a company today who are on this program who worked for Buell at that time and developed the Ulysses and used different, you know, ways to look at building an adventure bike that they put to good use. But yeah, it's a great motorcycle. It's a do-everything bike. It's a good touring bike. It's a good sport bike. It's good off-road. Super fun to ride. So we're towards the end of the collection. More modern motorcycles. Some interesting bikes include this MT500, which was a military motorcycle. They tried to get a U.S. government contract, and government decided that they wanted to have a motorcycle that ran on diesel fuel, the same that they run their tanks. So we did not get that contract awarded to us. But these bikes were sold to a number of other militaries in Europe. And we ran that motorcycle through 1998, and then that assembly line that made those bikes was converted to the custom vehicle operations assembly line at York, which debuted in 1999.
So how many years were these things made, or are they still being made?
They're not. They're no longer being made. From a Harley-Davidson standpoint, it was just a few years. They're a pretty rare motorcycle.
Any particular foreign militaries that we might know of?
They were Western, you know, NATO style militaries. Then of course you got the V-Rod here, which was a game-changing motorcycle when it came out in 2002.
The bike before its time.
Very much so. Liquid-cooled V-twin, 4-valve heads, hydroform perimeter frame, all aluminum bodywork. It's a beautiful bike even today.
And we've got behind it, what year Heritage Springer is that?
So it'd be probably could be as late as a 98, so somewhere in that era. Yeah, Springer front end, only Harley-Davidson could do that kind of a front end. It really is beautiful. So right here, Tripp, is one of the newest displays in the Harley-Davidson Museum. This pays tribute to Mama Tribe, which is a custom motorcycle show right here in Milwaukee. It's an amazing show that's also connected to a really cool event called Flat Out Friday, which is an indoor flat track race.
Wow.
Well, you race at the Fiserv Forum where the Milwaukee Bucks play on concrete in flat track style and short track, but they use Dr. Pepper syrup to spray on the floor to give enough tackiness to race a motorcycle on it. So this is actually one of the bikes that has raced at Flat Out Friday.
I'm going to be calling you up for tickets to that.
Oh, it's a great event. You need to come. We'd love to host you. It's in the middle of winter, so it's going to be cold here. So great event, great show, a very eclectic group of motorcycles that are on display. And then at Flat Out Friday, the race classes, you've got everything from pro classes to hooligan to kids racing to inappropriate bike racing and mini bikes.
This looks like the definition of a beater rat rod.
Man, it looks cool, doesn't it? A Sportster you could take off-road. This is Danger Dan's bike. I don't know if you've ever heard of Danger Dan.
I have.
This is his custom Sportster, the Dirtster. He actually rode to Sturgis on a Pan America this year on some BDR trails, you know, from I guess they went through Colorado to get up into Sturgis. Just some really cool customs. This was a racing sidecar. This is a 1924 FLH sidecar with a 29 motorcycle. So it was raced by factory Harley-Davidson racer Ralph Hepburn for the 1924.
I love that cantilevered.
It's really cool, isn't it? Can you imagine being in the sidecar and leaning with the bike, and then the racers?
Well, you know, when you see the modern day sidecars and they've got those platforms and the guys are leaning all the way out, this would negate a lot of the reason to have to do that.
Leaning sidecar. Yeah, really cool. It's a unique motorcycle.
Oh, this is about what I started out with. This was like my first bike back in '69, and we did call it the Spine Crusher.
Oh yeah.
Except we didn't have shocks.
Didn't have any shocks.
We had like a sponge wrapped in vinyl, stapled to some plywood, with a 2.5 horsepower Tecumseh engine.
Well, boonie bike racing has become a real thing, and so boonie bike racers, they're pull start, 4-stroke engine, small mini bikes basically, but there's a kind of an openness to the rules that you can kind of do a lot of different things with the controls and the seating position and everything, and they race them not only indoors at Flat Out Friday, but they had like a TT race here during the anniversary and homecoming that looked pretty wild with all kinds of jumps and different things guys were running them. Well, you were here for homecoming, but Flat Out Friday is something you want to go. You got to see it.
I was too busy eating cheese curds, man.
Welcome to Milwaukee.
Well, hey, I know you've got to get going, and I want to thank you. This has been great.
Glad you're here in Milwaukee and coming to the museum.
Thank you so much.
All you viewers out there also make it to Milwaukee and come check us out.
Folks, make sure you get up here. This is the Harley-Davidson Museum. If you like Harley-Davidson, even if you don't like Harley-Davidson, this is a place to come to learn about motorcycle history, the motorcycle culture, and probably the most iconic motorcycle brand in American history. Take care, folks.
Have you subscribed to Tripp on Two Wheels yet? Hey, what are you waiting for? Do it now.
Woohoo!